printed out into so welcome to this panel discussion on achieving inclusive economies. My name is Ophelia, as you heard, and I work on UN advocacy, where I focus on sustainable development, and I will be moderating this illustrious panel. With me are 4 panelists who I will introduce in a minute, but first, there's what we know, either through data or the anecdotal evidence of our lives, and that's that LGBTIQ people are often denied the basic necessities of a dignified life. We also know that our communities continue to survive under increasingly difficult conditions. For many years, most of our efforts have been dedicated towards ending criminalization and violence. And the inbuilt assumption in this strategy is that if we are treated like everybody else, then we will also have access to stable, dignified, maybe even happy lives. Perhaps that's true. Maybe it's not. We also know that LGBTIQ people around the world are working tirelessly towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty and hunger, to improve health outcomes, to achieve gender equality, to access and share decent work, and even to subvert the climate crisis. And so the economy is an arena of life that we as LGBTIQ people have a stake in, and we are actually actively contributing to improving. And so although most of our work appears to be in the human rights field, what I have found is that LGBT people are working tirelessly across the world to shape economic systems, to change economic systems, and to navigate economic systems, depending on what they are dealing with. So from our panelists today, you will hear some of the current strategies that LGBTIQ people are employing in the world of economics to survive and to thrive. We will hear about the nexus of LGBT rights and displacement, migration, the COVID-19 pandemic, and many others. As Nila mentioned, on a logistical note, 2 of our speakers today are primarily Spanish speakers, which is actually a credit to them. And we are working with some lovely interpreters in the physical and virtual rooms to make sure we are all in communication. So I will ask everybody who speaks, including myself, to do so at a reasonable pace so that the interpretation can happen. I will also request your patience because operating in 2 languages can make things a bit slower. But I promise you, our speakers are worth the effort. So let's start from you, Dr. Lee. Dr. Badgett is the chief economist at COPA, the LGBTI+ Economic Power Lab. And I would like for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, the work you're doing at the lab, what you see from what I perceive as a bird's eye view as the extent of the problem, and what initiatives, crucially, what initiatives you've encountered that we should be paying attention to and maybe even scaling to improve the lives of LGBT people across the world.
Okay, that's a lot of questions.
I believe in you.
Yes, yes. So I'm an economist, and I have, the last time I saw some of you, maybe I was more of a professor type person, but now I have taken the kind of information that you were talking about in terms of the experiences of LGBTI people around the world, the economic challenges that we face, and have come together with some colleagues to create an organization that will address those. Our goal at COPA is to build and unleash economic power among LGBTI people. So that is not quite the same thing as economic inclusion, but I think it's economic inclusion is the kind of work that I've done for a long time, the UNDP and World Bank LGBTI plus economic, inclusion index, for example, is a great, kind of checklist of things that we think of related to inclusion. But I think it is useful to at least define what we mean by that term and how we're using it in this kind of context. And I think about it as having two pieces. One piece has to do with LGBTI people having the opportunities that we are denied in many cases to get the education, to have the good health care, the freedom from stigma that's good for our health, to get the qualifications that we need to do the kind of work that we want to do, to have those opportunities, but to also have those opportunities work out in ways that give us good outcomes, good livelihoods, the ability to live a dignified life, as our friend Andrew Park would remind us to say. And I think we are a long way from that in many different ways. But I want to add something to that question about inclusion, which is this question of power, because economics, good livelihoods, gives us power in many different kinds of ways. To have the things that we want, need, and the relationships that we want to have. So if we have the economic means to get good health care, we can exercise our reproductive rights to have children, to get gender-affirming care. If we have the power to start a business, we can be our own bosses in many ways. We can hire other LGBTI people to bring power to our communities. We can decide where we want to live. We can live outside of families where sometimes the relationships are not easy to manage. And we can live with the people that we want to live with. And because we have that power, what people that I've talked to in my research have said is that gives us power in our families. If we are bringing something to the table in terms of contributions to keep our families going, then we will have a different relationship with our family members. We will get more respect. We will get more respect in our communities when people see the contributions that we're making to our local economies. We can turn that economic power into political power. I think we all know how that works, right? We can use these things, which should be a right for everybody, but we can use this kind of power and make it at least as powerful in our lives as political power, the political power that we seek, the kinds of things that Maria was talking about. So this is happening. As Ophelia notes, this is something that's been happening for a while now. I think it really increased during and after COVID when we realized just how economically vulnerable we are as a community. What I see it looking like, and the work that I've been doing, is actually LGBTI people and their organizations creating those opportunities for us, for ourselves, finding the resources to help do that. So the kinds of things that we see they're using those resources to teach people how to start and to run businesses. They're to turn our side hustles into a thriving business over time. They're working to give people IT skills. In Argentina, there's a social enterprise doing that for transgender people. There's one here in the U.S. In Nepal, they've given people the kind of training that they need to become a trekking guide, which is a big industry in Nepal. We see this happening in many different places. We see LGBTI people and organizations helping each other form credit cooperatives and mutual aid groups, putting our political agenda into work to get quotas for transgender people and public sector employment in Argentina and Uruguay, opening a trans health clinic in India that's run by and for transgender people. So our organizations are finding these ways to do this. They're finding support from organizations like Outright and its economic empowerment grants, like COPPA, another community organization built to focus on these issues. Some of our funders are helping us with that. Sometimes our tax dollars go to to organizations like that will create the trekking guide program in Nepal, or USAID's funding of these organizations. And we're starting to see development banks get on board. The Inter-American Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank are really out in front. World Bank is, we're pushing them to try to catch up. So we have a lot of work to do because there still are not that many of these programs and not that many people being reached. We have to make sure we reach our whole communities. LGBTQ women, transgender people, intersex people are often left behind by the economy, and we don't want to leave them out by our changes, our work on the economy. So we have a learning agenda as well, because we're learning how to do this better. But we have lots of plans, we have lots of ideas to try out. And I think that the key thing is that we work together within our communities to lead those efforts so that they really speak to the lives that we have, that we want to lead, the dreams that we have for ourselves, and to make sure they're at least as ambitious as our goals are on the human rights side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Badgett. I will reserve my questions for now because I know the audience will have some really good questions for you. But I think what struck me when you were speaking was about the turning of the side hustles into, something like a big business, because I know that LGBT people are usually some of the most creative people that I know, and they are usually doing something pretty cool anyway.
Yeah.
So it's good to think about when we say we are looking for economics, it can sound very abstract. And when you bring it down to this is what people are doing, then it really helps. So thank you for that. I will turn to Raul. Raul Caporal is a human rights activist from Mexico, where he is the director of Casa Frida. Raul, your organization works with displaced LGBTIQ people in Mexico, but your focus is not just legal, it's also economic. So from your standpoint, doing this work, helping LGBT people access jobs and things like that, what should we be doing to achieve an inclusive economy? And I'm going to hand over to Raul, who is speaking in Spanish, and then we'll have some interpretation. So over to you, Raul.
Gracias, Ophelia.
Thank you, Ophelia.
Bueno, no podemos hablar de economías si no comprendemos cómo atraviesa nuestras vidas todo el tiempo.
Well, we can't talk about economies if we don't really understand the impact they have on our lives all the time.
Y también no podemos hablar de inclusión financiera si no reconocemos que la mayoría de los modelos económicos han sido creados para la exclusión.
And we also can't talk about financial inclusion without recognizing that most financial models have been designed to exclude.
Y estos modelos han sido creados también desde las riquezas, desde quienes tienen la riqueza.
And those models have been designed from a standpoint of wealth by those who have the wealth.
Entonces, ¿cómo un grupo de personas históricamente vulnerabilizadas y personas LGBTIQ+ pueden generar riqueza hoy día?
So the question is, how can a group of people who have been historically vulnerable, LGBTIQ+ people, how can they be included in those models?
Desde nuestra organización nos hemos dado a la tarea de atender esta realidad. Y dentro de las acciones que estamos llevando a cabo es primero escuchar. Queremos escuchar a las personas LGBTIQ+ desplazadas internamente en México y quienes vienen a México en búsqueda de un país de acogida, en búsqueda de asilo y en búsqueda de inclusión.
And so as an organization, we have dedicated ourselves primarily to addressing this reality and to tailoring our actions to address this reality. And first and foremost, we want to listen. We want to listen to LGBTIQ+ people who have been internally displaced in our country, and also to those who come to our country looking for refuge and asylum and a place that will take them in.
Nuestra oficina en la frontera sur de México con Guatemala, 9 de cada 10 personas LGBTI que vienen huyendo de extrema violencia, lo primero que buscan al llegar al territorio es buscar trabajo.
In our office, which is on the southern border with Guatemala, 9 of the 10 people who come fleeing extreme violence are looking for employment opportunities.
Sabíamos que las personas buscan reconstruir sus sueños, su futuro, pero no podemos hablar de un futuro si no hablamos también de crecimiento y desarrollo económico dentro de nuestras poblaciones LGBTIQ refugiadas.
Most people come looking to fulfill their dreams, looking for a better future, but we can't talk about a future if we don't talk about the economic development of the refugee people who are LGBTIQ+ who come to us looking for assistance.
Nuestros proyectos y programas también sabían que no solamente se trata de capacitar y de fortalecer los conocimientos sobre desarrollo económico de las personas LGBTI en contextos de movilidad humana. Había que entender que no pueden concentrarse en las capacitaciones, los talleres, el emprendimiento, si tenemos hambre.
And in our programs and in the projects that we carry out, yes, we're focused on training, we're focused on building knowledge about how LGBTIQ+ people can have more economic development, but we can't talk about that if people are experiencing hunger.
Es por eso que la organización se ha articulado con las políticas públicas mexicanas para poder atraer recursos que permitan a las personas beneficiadas de nuestros proyectos cubrir sus necesidades básicas, alimentación, alojamiento, medicamentos, dignificar los tiempos de espera en la frontera sur mientras existe la regularización migratoria.
So that's why we've been working very closely with Mexican public policy to try to bring in more resources that can benefit people that we're working with to cover their basic needs. By basic needs, we're talking about food, housing, medical care, and also to have a more dignified experience while waiting at the southern border to adjust their status.
Buscamos redefinir los conceptos fundamentales sobre la riqueza y creemos que la riqueza debe ser entendida de acuerdo a cada persona. Cada persona tiene que comprender también a partir de sus sueños, de sus aspiraciones, de sus metas. Por eso nuestros programas son holísticos, son integrales, que no solamente buscan la ayuda humanitaria en la frontera, sino también capacita, forma y acompaña para crear economías sostenibles, economías inclusivas, donde atraemos también a los empresarios pequeños, medianos y a las grandes empresas transnacionales. Hablamos de los efectos de la inclusión económica dentro de estos espacios.
And so that's why one of the things that we're working on is redefining what is our concept of wealth. And we believe that each individual person should be able to define what their concept of wealth is based on what their dreams are, what their aspirations are, what their goals are. And that's why we're working through comprehensive programs that not only provide humanitarian aid, but also provide training so that we can promote a more sustainable economy. And to do this, we're working with small, medium, and large transnational businesses to promote more economic inclusion.
5 puntos del trabajo que estamos haciendo en coordinación con Right y los socios en Frontera Sur de México.
There are 5 areas that we're working with in coordination with our partners on the southern border of Mexico. Uno a la vez, por favor.
Becando a las personas beneficiarias para que puedan fortalecer sus conocimientos sin pasar hambre, sin estar en la calle, sin estar en vulnerabilidad.
Providing scholarships to people who are receiving training and building their knowledge so that they can do that without worrying about being out on the street, without worrying about being hungry, or without worrying about having their basic needs met.
2, acompañar los procesos de capacitación y formación para la inclusión financiera con perspectiva psicosocial y cuidado a la salud mental.
Number 2 is increasing the training that we offer for financial inclusion while also including care for mental health and psychosocial care.
Fomentando el emprendimiento y la innovación para incubar, acelerar, escalar y replicar proyectos de ingresos mínimos para todas las personas desplazadas.
also promoting entrepreneurship and innovation, where we can incubate, accelerate, bring to scale, and replicate people who have these models for people who have been displaced.
Y finalmente, entendiendo y comprendiendo a partir de la experiencia, Casa Frida ya tiene 5 años trabajando y poco más de 5,000 personas beneficiadas en estos proyectos de procesos de formación y capacitación.
And number 5 is truly understanding and learning from our own experience. At Casa Frida, we've been working now for 5 years, and we have a little bit more than 5,000 people who have benefited from our training and formation programs.
Hablar de inclusión financiera para nosotras también es construir y hablar de futuro, un futuro sostenible en igualdad de condiciones, pero reconociendo la histórica vulnerabilidad a la que nos hemos enfrentado las comunidades desplazadas.
At Casa Frida, when we talk about economic inclusion, we're talking about building a future, building a sustainable economy, and having equality of conditions for the people that we work with, but without losing sight of the historic vulnerability that displaced people have experienced.
So, thank you so much.
You see, I told you it was worth it.
Les dije que valía la pena.
So I had a lot about, and this brought a question that came to us when I was more involved in the more mainstream women's movement, which was, if you add women to the economy and STAR, do you have an inclusive outcome? So I liked your first comments about navigating a system that was made to exclude you and having to find a way to be included in such a system. But we are queer people. That's kind of what we do, right? The systems are not made for us, but that doesn't mean that we are not able to thrive. So thank you very much, Raul. I will turn to you, Felipe. Felipe is the CEO of the Colombian Diversity Chamber. Felipe, tell us a bit about yourself, how you came to do the work that you do now, but also what you see as the major barriers to LGBTIQ inclusion in the economy, and how we can knock them down so that we can live dignified lives. Over to you, Felipe.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning for everybody. As you mentioned, my name is Felipe Cardenas. I run the Colombian Diversity Chamber of Commerce since 2012, thanks to the support of the NGLCC, the National US LGBT Chamber of Commerce that is based in this city too. They have been our mentors and our strong supporters, and lately, thanks to the generosity of Outright, we have been able to work a lot on LGBTQI plus inclusion in my country. I would like to share with you some facts and numbers related with Colombia. Colombia is a country of 52 million citizens these days, and we have 3 million of Venezuelans living in our territory for the last 5 years. They have moved there, which is important to highlight in our conversation, because remember, back in the 80s and in the 90s, we were the ones fleeing our country. Now we are the ones receiving people to our country. We were not used to that. We had a very dramatic and long internal conflict of over 50 years that kind of came to, not a conclusion, but to a better status after the peace accord we signed in 2017. And since then, a lot of people start migrating to Colombia, especially our neighbors. But we as a society were not trained not even to coexist within ourselves. Now we have the challenge to also coexist with people that are coming from our neighbor countries. And that is specifically tackling sexual diversity. If you take a look on the map of South America, we are in the northern portion of South America, and the neighbor countries we call ourselves the Andean regions because of the Andes Mountains. So we have Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And out of those 5 countries, we are the only country with full LGBT rights legislated already. Maybe Ecuador has marriage equality, but nothing else. And interestingly, Colombia started becoming, as some of our neighbors said, a small oasis for LGBTQI plus people, not only for these countries, but also from Panama, that is our very close neighbor, going into Central America, with one of the toughest realities for LGBTQI plus people. Panamanian Parliament is trying to legislate to write in the Constitution that marriage equality will never happen, like very specifically. So that's going 40, 50 years before the different conversations we are having in the region. But also, if you take a look on the Caribbean islands, and we have a very, very important representative here from the Caribbean, from the Dominican Republic, most of the Caribbean islands, from the Spanish-speaking islands of the Caribbean and also the English-speaking islands of the Caribbean, I would say, different than Puerto Rico, nobody else around in the Caribbean have full LGBT rights implementation, and Puerto Rico just got what is legislated through the US. So in that sense, also those countries are looking into Colombia as a possible destination to coexist and to live. And I'm giving you this context because back in 2012, a group of different entrepreneurs, I was one of them, I have the privilege to come after living a few years in Mexico working for corporations like these ones, when I decided I couldn't wear a suit and a tie on the daily basis and be in the closet as an openly gay individual, I quit that job and moved back to Colombia and decided to become an entrepreneur myself. And the US Embassy invited us to have a conversation about economic inclusion. And the hypothesis back then, in 2012, that we did when we launched this entity was what would happen once we get LGBT rights. Because we knew we were walking that path. LGBT movement in Colombia is dated since 1976. So we have walked a few years in order to get LGBT rights in place. But then we asked back then in 2012, what would happen? And then we opened an entire agenda of economic inclusion because we believed once we get LGBT rights in place, another challenges will arise. The fact that today in Colombia, you can get married with a same-sex couple, you can adopt with a same-sex partner children, you can transit or transition illegally in your ID. There is an anti-discrimination law. There is also public policies that support us. Having all of that is not a guarantee that we can eat, that we can pay rent, that we can educate ourselves, that we can travel, that we can recreate, that we can have families, that we actually can access to a decent and fair retirement. So those new questions are more on the economic field of the conversation. And then we have been running this entity with a great group of individuals. I have the privilege and the challenge to lead a team of 52 individuals that are working full-time in our offices in Bogota, delivering more than 10 hours per day, trying to impact and support as much as LGBT people we can. But we realized that question that we asked ourselves back in 2012 was real, because now if you are going to Colombia, you can access all of that. If you are a Venezuelan, between 52 and 55 hours, you can legalize your status, because we pass an express path for them to gain a permanent residency in our country. A lot of Dominicans are coming to Colombia to get married. A lot of Ecuadorians, Venezuelans, and Panamanians are moving to Colombia trying to pursue a job. And that is more or less viable to happen. But then after Brazil, we are the second country within whole Latin America with most violent assassinations of transgender individuals. And that's very hard. Our people is still pretty excluded. The so-called LGBTQI plus agenda is only white, cis, G agenda. It's not generally LGBTQI plus agenda. Still, a lot of women that are LBT struggle to get access to financial inclusion, but also to a formal job. We have recognition of non-binary people in our constitution and the IDs. But most of our banks, for example, don't even have a field for people that identify as non-binary. So how we are going to provide them at least access to a bank account? Things like that are still happening in the country. So I would say the greatest challenge, and this is probably an open conversation for all the countries and territories that are achieving LGBT rights, is that our agenda and our work and our duties is way beyond accessing to LGBT rights. Because once we get them, the conversation will go to another challenge, that is how we are going to guarantee these people that finally are not second-class citizens, have the access to everything they need to thrive in a society. And at the end, the conclusion that we get is always the same. discrimination is
Normalmente
the
no hago ese tipo
worst
de eventos. O sea, yo
business
respeto
a
para los
society
programas. Los
can do.
programas son reuniones en las que hay pues una formación, pero
Wow,
no es a
thank
través de
you.
un event.
Thank
Y
you
no es
so
nuestra gente. O
much.
sea, estos son los de pero la que a mí siempre convoca para interpretar y la que siempre gestiona las
Yeah, I
cabinas
think
no
you
está aquí.
have brought home some really important points and actually answered some of the questions I had at the beginning to say if we achieve the equality in the Constitution or we have the laws changed or we have non-discrimination laws, does that guarantee good lives for LGBT people? And what I'm hearing is that it's a bit complicated. You know, it's not that simple. It's a good start, but that's not all there is. I had a lot about intersectionality to say that people are not simply experiencing life as whatever sexual minority they are, but also as women, as indigenous people, as racialized people, wherever they are in the world, as refugees, as displaced, as internally displaced people. That also determines the way that they live their lives, and if the structures are still in place, regardless of what we change in the law, we may not have a change in the reality. So thank you, Felipe. We have one last panelist, and then it will be your turn. So I hope you have your questions ready. We're going to hear from Rosalba. Rosalba Diaz Crisostomo is a lesbian, non-binary feminist activist from the Dominican Republic. She founded the Dominican Community of Leadership and Inclusive Spaces, COLSDOM, but she also promoted and created the first Diversa Savings, Credit, and Multiple Services Cooperative, Co-op Diversa. So Rosalba, I'm really interested to hear about your work in these two formations because one sounds like it's for human rights work and the other one sounds a bit different from the work that I would expect from a human rights activist. Tell us a bit about your work and some of the lessons that you have learned. Over to you, Rosalba.
Sí, primeramente me gustaría hablar sobre la comunidad de liderazgos y espacios inclusivos dominicana, COLESDOM.
So first, I would like to talk about the Dominican Community for Leadership and Inclusive Spaces, COLESDOM.
Es una organización sin fines de lucro fundada en el año 2017
We are a nonprofit founded in 2017
que tiene por objetivo principal apoyar la inclusión social de las personas lesbianas, bisexuales, transmasculinas, intersexuales, no binarias y adolescentes que transgreden los roles tradicionales de género.
Our main goal is to support people, lesbian, bisexuals, male, trans, intersex, queer, and adolescents.
Trabajamos a través de 6 coordinaciones específicamente que aglutinan a estos 6 grupos poblacionales de diversas orientaciones sexuales, identidades de género y características sexuales diversas.
So we work with 3 different areas, and with them we coordinate work with these identities and populations in their different areas.
Buscamos apoyarle en el desarrollo de sus capacidades, acompañamiento psicológico, desarrollo de emprendimiento, acompañamiento en el desarrollo de sus liderazgos.
So we're doing our best to support them in their empowerment journey, leadership, to articulate their capacity of advocacy, construction of movement, psychological support.
En el año 2018, cuando COLESDOM inició su proceso de incorporación legal en la República Dominicana,
In 2018, when COLESDOM started the legal incorporation process in Dominican Republic,
el Estado Dominicano nos rechazó la incorporación legal, violentándonos nuestros derechos a la libre asociación.
the Dominican government rejected our request for legal incorporation, which violated our rights to free association rights.
En ese momento existían más organizaciones legalmente constituidas dirigidas hacia la comunidad LGBTIQ en la República Dominicana.
At that moment, there were other organizations legally incorporated in Dominican Republic for the LGBTIQ.
Este hecho representó una primicia en materia de derechos humanos en la República Dominicana, ya que COLESDOM se convirtió en la primera organización LGBTIQ del país que el Estado Dominicano le rechazaba la incorporación legal.
So this decision, the rejection from the Dominican government became a very important because it was the first time that the government was denying the legal incorporation of an LGBTIQ organization, COLESDOM.
Esta situación nos llenó de mucha de mucho coraje, podría decirlo de esa manera, y nos motivó a iniciar unos procesos de incidencia política y de lobby estratégico en el país para poder lograr en el 2020 nuestra incorporación legal.
So this situation moved us, make us feel disappointed, and we started a process of political advocacy and also lobbying in order to get recognition and being legally incorporated in 2020.
A todo esto, Colezdón como organización ha venido durante estos años trabajando en los procesos de desarrollo de incidencia política, construcción de capacidades con las comunidades que trabajamos, estas 6 coordinaciones específicamente.
So as a result, Collesdom is an organization that is focusing its work in advocacy development, political advocacy development, and construction or partnerships, and focusing, of course, in the 6 areas that I mentioned previously.
Además, hemos estado también trabajando en apoyo humanitario, realización de investigaciones, movilizaciones y procesos de acompañamiento de denuncias nacionales e internacionales por violación de derechos humanos.
And on top of that, we have been working in humanitarian processes, in research, in building capacity, in movement construction, and also to provide support for international complaints against human rights.
En el 2019, en la pandemia del COVID, pudimos evidenciar que las poblaciones con las que trabaja la organización estaba siendo muy vulnerabilizada, excluida y un poco más marginalizada de lo común.
In 2019, because of COVID, the situation revealed that our communities were more marginalized and vulnerable to the situation, to what was happening.
Estas poblaciones estaban experimentando más dificultades para acceder a un empleo digno, los procesos de acceder a préstamos específicos en la banca dominicana para poder desarrollar sus liderazgos y sus emprendimientos, y también la parte del acceso a seguros médicos para poder atender sus necesidades de salud en ese momento.
The entire situation was making very difficult for us to be able to secure a dignified job, to access credits, to be able to get credits from the institutional banks, and it was necessary to work on leadership to make sure that also we were able to get access to medical insurance.
En la pandemia del COVID, el 72% de la población LGBTIQ no recibió ningún apoyo de asistencia humanitaria, según los datos de la encuesta nacional LGBTIQ del 2020.
According to the national survey in 2020 of the LGBTIQ data shows that 72% of the LGBTIQ population didn't receive any type of support or assistance from the Dominican government.
Todo esto arrojó a que como Colezdón debíamos de movilizarnos y crear acciones que vinieran a dar respuesta hacia una sostenibilidad económica más inclusiva para estos grupos, porque estaban literalmente pasando hambre.
So all of these make us feel that we needed to organize and motivate us to add a stronger, because all these groups were going through a difficult situation. They were marginalized and they were very vulnerable.
El equipo de Colezdón nos reunimos y pudimos identificar que teníamos que crear un espacio diferente, que a través de Colezdón no podíamos hacer frente a estas dificultades económicas, sociales y culturales que había traído la pandemia del COVID-19.
So the Colezdón team, the entire staff got together and we decided that we needed to react differently, that we needed to come up with a response completely different to face the reality, that we needed a different economic and social response to the challenges we were facing.
Entendimos que crear una cooperativa iba a ser la forma más idónea para poder dar frente a estas situaciones. Y entonces, bueno,
We understood that by putting together a cooperative will be the best way to face these challenges.
entonces entendíamos y dialogábamos que crear una cooperativa no era como tener una organización sin fines de lucro en materia de derechos humanos.
And we were having conversations and dialogues among ourselves, and we understood, okay, having a co-op, it will be totally different than having a non-profit.
Entendimos que para la creación de esta cooperativa debíamos de construir capacidades, conocimientos específicos, técnicos, habilidades para desarrollar y apoyar y acompañar emprendimientos sociales.
And we understood that in order to put together a co-op, we needed to invest in research, technical skills, training, different capacities and abilities to be able to put together something that will bring about social change and economic opportunities.
Incluido hasta los acompañamientos socioeconómicos, acompañamientos que tenían que ver con la visión psicológica que puedan tener estos emprendedores y emprendedoras de la comunidad LGBTIQ.
And also taking into consideration that we needed to provide socioeconomical support in order to address the psychological mindsets of all those entrepreneurs that wanted to invest or to have this type of opportunities.
También investigamos y pudimos ver algunas estadísticas que también en la encuesta nacional LGBTIQ dice que 6 de cada 10 personas LGBTIQ en República Dominicana están desempleadas en el contexto de la pandemia del COVID-19.
And we also look into the data. We saw and studied the statistics, and we find out that the national survey of the LGBTIQ it indicated that 6 out of 10 people were unemployed during the pandemic.
Encontramos también que el 85% de la población LGBTIQ sufría algún tipo de discriminación y violencia.
And we also found that 85% of LGBTIQ community suffer a type of discrimination or violence.
Sin embargo, en sondeos actualizados que hemos realizado desde Colestón, nos hemos dado cuenta que el 100% de la población LGBTIQ en la República Dominicana ha sufrido violencia, discriminación y también desde sus familiares.
But nonetheless, using our own data, our own service, our organization found that 100% of the LGBTQI community population people have suffered from violence and discrimination, and sometimes coming from their family members.
Es por esto que nos llenamos de mucha valentía después de haber leído las leyes que rigen el cooperativismo en la República Dominicana y fundamos el 14 de septiembre del 2021 la primera cooperativa de ahorro, crédito y servicios múltiples diversas dirigida hacia la comunidad LGBTIQ en la República Dominicana.
Wow.
And it's for that reason that we decided to go deeper into the legislation and to study the legislation about co-ops and be able to found in September 14, 2021, the first saving and credit and multiple services co-op in
Ya
Dominica.
fundamos la
Qué bien. La cooperativa fue fundada por 20 personas fundadoras, no solamente yo.
So the co-op was founded by 20 people. It was not only me, 20 people in total.
20. Bueno, y para hablar un poco sobre en qué se complementa Colestón y COP Diversa, siempre decimos allá en República Dominicana que COP Diversa es una de las hijas, ¿verdad?, de Colestón.
So, and now just to talk about a little bit of the co-op, COP Diversa. Colesdon and COP Diversa work together, but we like to say that COP Diversa is one of the daughters of Colesdon.
COP Diversa viene a hacer frente específicamente a la pobreza, a la marginalidad, a la exclusión social, específicamente en materia económica y desde una perspectiva sostenible para la comunidad LGBTIQ en la República Dominicana.
So COP Diversa aims to face to challenge those problems, the economic problems, the exclusion, economic exclusion that the LGBTQ people are facing from a different mindset to become sustainable.
Y la cooperativa hasta ahora se ha convertido en un espacio para apoyar a los grupos de la comunidad LGBTIQ a cumplir sus sueños y que esos sueños sean acompañados, guiados y que sean a través del compañerismo, del diálogo, de toda esa riqueza que tenemos cuando nos ponemos a trabajar en algo que es desconocido para nosotros, pero tenemos esta fe incansable de que vamos a poder a largo plazo lograr acciones positivas para el movimiento LGBTIQ en materia económica.
So this co-op, it is this space in which we want to create opportunities. We want to help those to dream big. We want them to overcome their difficulties, but we want to do it from a different point. We want to use fellowship, dialogue. We want people to understand that their own wealth. We want them to work together, and we founded this co-op with this belief that we can work together. We can bring power to the table. We can bring positive actions for change.
En el 2020, finalmente, después de todos esos años de trabajo, en el 2022, disculpen, pudimos ya tener nuestro decreto presidencial.
In 2022, after many years of hard work, we got a presidential decree, presidential order, the recognition.
Porque como ustedes saben, las cooperativas se rigen por los gobiernos de cada uno de los países.
Because as you know, co-ops are under the control of each government.
Codiversa representa una transformación social, cultural y económica en las disidencias de género de la República Dominicana.
So Codiversa represents a social, cultural, and economic change, transformation in the Dominican culture.
Desde una mirada inclusiva para buscar y perseguir la justicia económica de nosotros.
From an inclusive perspective to obtain and to gain our independence from us, for everyone.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalba. I heard a lot about being adaptable. So today you are a nonprofit. Maybe you need to be a co-op, you know? Or maybe you need to have a child who is a co-op, is what I'm hearing. I heard about credit access, which is a big problem, and medical insurance, because for many of us who come from less formalized economies, we are the medical insurance of our family members. And in some cases, we make formations like cooperative societies to navigate a difficult system. So thank you, Rosalba, for sharing about Co-op Diversa and Colesdom. That was really interesting. And thank you to my illustrious panel in general for your very insightful remarks. So now it's your time to shine. I hope you've had enough time to write down the brilliant points from the audience. No pressure. I will start with the people who are joining us online. Whitney, do we have any questions?
Hi, everyone. So I just want to say hello to our colleagues online from Nigeria, Cameroon, Panama, Western Balkans, Uganda, Singapore, Nepal, Kenya, and Canada. And that's just a few to give you all a sense of who's out there. And I also just want to say that there's been some really interesting conversations about people agreeing about the fact about being dismissed at work for their gender identity and really struggling to be able to show a continuous form of careers that have really, and having gaps in their resumes, and how that's really had them struggle in being able to get a sustainable career going. There's been some really great sharing of economic opportunities and organizations and the work that they're doing in the chat, which is great to see, an acknowledgement of sex workers and the work that they're doing and how that is so important to this conversation around economic inclusion. Also, this agreement that discrimination is bad for business and bad for entrepreneurship. So a lot of consensus there. I have 3 questions that I'll share. The first one is about some of these really restrictive spaces like Uganda, where the Anti-Homosexuality Act has really limited the space broadly for LGBTQI plus communities. And so the question is kind of, can we talk about what economic inclusion can look like in a space like Uganda, where these laws are not only putting them out on the streets because they can't find housing, but then it makes it particularly difficult to find jobs. The second question is looking at LGBTQI plus organizations more broadly. So the question is about the fact that organizations often require university education and or extensive work experience to gain access to even work for these organizations. So are there any best practices about what LGBTQI plus organizations can be doing to open doors to those who haven't had access to education or haven't had access to careers, particularly transgender, people of color, and often communities that really struggle to gain access? And then the last question is going back to this fact around, when you are dismissed from work or you have to provide information of a previous employer who may have fired you because of your gender identity or sexual orientation. Any advice on how you might navigate those processes when you're looking for jobs and you don't maybe want to out yourself or be put in a position where that information may be made available to a future employer? Best practices on navigating that. Thanks.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you to our online audience for those brilliant questions and also for sharing opportunities, which is very cool. Okay, other people in the room, do we have some questions? I hope my panelists are taking notes and are ready to answer some of these questions.
Yep, I have one over here. Thank you. Mark Bromley with the Council for Global Equality. I wanted to ask a question about sort of how this inclusion agenda relates to, unfortunately, some of the coordinated attacks that we're seeing, particularly here in Washington, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI programs in corporate America in this country, in educational institutions in this country, and in the federal government in the United States. It seems incredibly obvious that the inclusion agenda makes sense both from an individual corporate perspective or educational perspective, as well as from the macro perspective, right? And thank you, Lee, and the World Bank doing a lot of research to show that an inclusion agenda has an overall positive impact on GDP and the economy of a country. But we're seeing a moment of really coordinated, sustained attacks on the DEI agenda, which is essentially an inclusion agenda here in this country. And I'm wondering if we're seeing those similar attacks in an equally coordinated fashion in other parts of the world, and how we think about that and how we push back in an environment, particularly here in Washington, where facts don't seem to matter, and we seem to be losing the debate at a really crucial moment. So we'd love to just hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Mark. Yes.
Good morning, Gabriel de la Cruz. I use he, him pronouns from Presente, Peru. My question is, this was fascinating, and I really appreciate this panel information. And if we think about how does economic inclusion looks like in Latin America, we could talk about some similarities. So I wonder if we could find a way that we can support each other from different countries. As Felipe mentioned, for example, in Colombia, you have a lot of legislation that supports LGBTQ inclusion. In Peru, we don't have any. In Ecuador, we have a few, and still. So what's the way that we could maybe contribute together? I know that the private sector is very important because as they are globals, they could we can use their policies around the globe, and we can adjust depending on the country and the reality. But besides that, what as activists or leaders, what can we do to support each other between countries in Latin America? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. That also answers some of the questions that Mark has. So lots of contributions. Anybody else? Yes.
Hey, I'm Mark Black from New York, supporter of outright want to know what the panelists think about economic boycotts. I want to know what the panelists think about economic boycotts against companies that, deliberately discriminate, and donate money to anti-LGBTQ, campaign.
I also want to know what they think about economic boycotts. Thank you for that question. That's a really good question. I think I have a list, actually. All right.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Trevor, and I'm with an organization called Same Collective. So what we do is we create digital solutions to problems that may be plaguing the LGBTI community. And currently, we have a WhatsApp chatbot that delivers cognitive behavioral therapy to LGBTQI youth in low and middle income countries. Now, I heard the panelists talk about the link between mental health and economic livelihood. And I think that's a very important link because in the data that we've been collecting, we do see that a lot of young people say one of the biggest reasons why their mental health is not in a good place is because of the lack of economic opportunities. So I'm glad that came up. And in my years, I'm from Zimbabwe. And this topic is something that's very important to me because as a trans person, I experienced this firsthand. And in my years working in Zim, I realized that sometimes we do try to economic livelihood, create economic livelihood opportunities for the community, but we were faced with a big problem where a lot of the time people do not take up the opportunities or they drop out of those programs before they even finish. And it left us quite confused because a lot of people would say this is what they want, but when we avail those opportunities, they don't really take them up. And it wasn't until we realized the link between mental health and the ability to actually thrive in terms of seeking out economic opportunities. It can be very hard, especially in hostile environments, to think about, to envision a future for yourself. And I think being an entrepreneur requires delayed gratification. It requires you to believe in the future that you are investing in. And sometimes that can be hard when you are in an environment like Zimbabwe. So my question is to the panelists is, for those that mentioned mental health and economic inclusion, what kind of programs, the psychosocial support that is offered, is it specific to mindset change and creating the kind of mentality that makes a person as an entrepreneur thrive, or is it generalized mental health and psychosocial support? And secondly, when it's offered, is it digital? Is that something that's that you already do in terms of achieving a greater reach and making it more easily accessible to LGBTQI people? Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor. I see you could have been on the panel, so that's good. I like when there's expertise in the room. What a fun surprise. Thank you, Trevor. So we are going to hear from, unless there are any other questions, we are going to hear from our panelists. I'm going to ask you to attempt to answer some of the questions that you feel comfortable answering. I'm happy to direct them if you want. And then also just give us some reflections in terms of closing, what you want to see in the future. Trevor has told us about envisioning the future. So I want to hear what your dreams for the future are in this specific arena, but also some recommendations that you have for what we should be doing differently. You can also disregard my question because I won't beat you, and just give us some closing thoughts, and then we'll close and go to the next speech. So let's start with Raul. Yes, I can see you're very ready to answer. So give us some of your reflections and close.
Ok. Quiero responder a dos preguntas, particularmente sobre los ataques coordinados desde las empresas y también sobre la integralidad de los modelos de atención que contemplen la salud mental.
I would like to respond to some of the questions that were asked, especially regarding coordinated attacks from businesses and companies, and also the question about comprehensive, integral mental health care.
México es uno de los países en América Latina que tiene más organización entre las empresas y la iniciativa privada, que cuentan con el mayor número de políticas para la inclusión de la diversidad sexual y de otros grupos.
In Latin America, Mexico is one of the countries that has the highest number of policies that promote the inclusion of sexually diverse groups of people in private enterprise and in organizations.
Y esto es gracias a la influencia histórica de muchas empresas basadas en los Estados Unidos.
And this is thanks to the historic influence of many companies that originated in the United States.
Y hoy comenzamos a ver que esas mismas empresas transnacionales que están en Estados Unidos y México comienzan a retirar esas políticas de inclusión para responder al discurso actual de los gobiernos en turno.
And now what we're seeing is that those same transnational companies based in the United States and Mexico are starting to scale back or starting to withdraw some of their inclusive policies in line with some of the current government discourse we're hearing.
Ahora las empresas quieren dar pasos atrás sobre la inclusión cuando ya estamos dentro trabajando y generando riqueza para ellos.
And now the companies want to take steps backwards with regard to inclusion when we're already inside these companies generating wealth for them.
Sin embargo, confiamos que desde México podemos seguir impulsando ahora porque han dejado pilares sólidos en estos años y bueno, ahora las empresas en México pueden comenzar a influir también en otros sentidos.
But we believe that we can push forward in Mexico to maintain these policies because we have a strong foundation, strong pillars, and we believe that many of the companies in Mexico can exert an important influence in this regard.
Sobre integralidad.
Now, regarding the comprehensive care,
Casa Frida tiene una red de refugios, de albergues en México. Tiene 3 sedes, una en Monterrey, Ciudad de México y Chiapas, frontera con Guatemala.
Casa Frida has 3 headquarters for caring for displaced and refugee people, one based in Monterrey, one based in Mexico City, and one based in Chiapas.
Y por 5 años hemos diseñado modelos de programas de protección a víctimas de extremas violencias, delitos y sobrevivientes a crímenes de odio en México.
And for 5 years now, we've been developing models to protect people who have been the victim of extreme violence, of extreme crimes, and of hate crimes in particular.
Al principio nos enfocamos en crear un modelo que pudiera identificar a personas en riesgo, rescatarlas y brindar protección.
At first, we had a model that we were developing where we would identify people who were at risk, rescue them, and protect them.
Y la pregunta después era, ¿y qué sigue después del rescate y la protección?
And the question that we asked then was, well, what comes after rescuing and protecting?
Y hablamos entonces de cómo lograr la integración social, económica y cultural después de salir de nuestros programas de protección.
And that led us to the question of how can we truly achieve social, economic, and cultural integration after people leave our programs that provide them that protection.
Entonces nos dimos cuenta de la importancia de lograr construir modelos integrales que rescaten, protejan y reintegren a la sociedad.
And that's where we discovered the importance of developing comprehensive models which rescue, protect, and then integrate into society.
Entonces hablábamos de inclusión financiera también, hablábamos de cuidado a la salud mental desde una perspectiva psicosocial y hablábamos de cómo lograr integrar nuevamente a las culturas que estaban fuera de nuestros programas, es decir, una reintegración social, pero también sostenible en el tiempo.
So there we were talking about economic inclusion, we were talking about providing care, psychosocial care, and then we were also talking about how to include other cultures who were outside of our program so that we could promote integration on a sustainable level.
Entonces no podemos hablar de un egreso exitoso de nuestros programas si no hablamos del futuro, pero tampoco podemos hablar del futuro si no hablamos de cuidado a la salud mental, de resiliencia y de un futuro sostenible basado en las economías.
So that's where we decided that we can't talk about people successfully leaving our program if we don't talk about what their future will be. And we can't talk about what their future will be if we don't talk about their mental health, resilience, and sustainability on an economic level.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Raul. Any closing remarks, or are those your closing remarks?
Gracias, Raúl. ¿Algún comentario de cierre o eso fue su comentario?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, those are very powerful closing remarks. So thank you. Yes, I mean, I'm hearing a comprehensive approach to think of the person not just as a victim to be saved in this difficult situation, but as a person who should be integrated into the society. So thank you for your work and for sharing about it. That was really good. Okay. I'm going to turn to you, Felipe. Are there some questions you want to take on and close?
Yes, there was one around here specifically about best practices for people that is looking for employment opportunities. Thanks to the program we are delivering with Outright in Colombia, with the funding that very generously we have been given by you. We have been working with a lot of LGBTQI plus Colombians and migrants, helping them to gain more skills, to make them more eligible to be able to achieve successfully selection processes in different companies, corporations, entities. And what we have seen that has become very effective is that we also provide training to the human resources department of those companies, businesses, corporations, how to be more sensible towards the fact of having sexually diverse talent. In that sense, there is quite a few of corporations that have removed the requirement of previous working experience, and now interviews and competency assessments are being done or executed by what do you know or in what you are good at. And those are the conversations that are driving the job descriptions of the different job postings we are sharing with the individuals we want to impact. That is very powerful because what is that just little shift of the process, removing a requirement of years of experience in X, Y, or Z topic, is giving access to a lot of people from the LGBTQI plus community in Colombia that they can demonstrate not only by saying in an interview that they are good at, but actually showing by some tests and assessments that they can actually perform. And this relies on a thesis that we believe is probably the future, at least in Colombia, for LGBTQI plus recruitment. That is, we as businesses don't want you despite you are LGBT or because you are LGBT. We want you by your talent, period. Sexual diversity shouldn't be even part of the conversation. Later on, when you get inside the businesses and you start interacting with people, sexual diversity, of course, might arise or not, in any portion of the conversation, interacting with colleagues. And the only thing that the businesses and corporations need to guarantee is that you are in a safe space. But that is more powerful than saying that we are looking for LGBTQI plus talent. Because at the end, if we promote employment programs that are focused on LGBTQI plus, the problem you are going to have is you are going to have businesses full of sexually diverse individuals, but the environment can be hostile if you don't prepare the environment to receive those individuals with the sexual diversity. So that's a very powerful best practice we would like to share that is working thanks to this program. The second thing is pretty linked with intersectionality. And this is linked with the questions of boycotts, but also of the massive reaction we are seeing of corporations investing money against LGBTQI plus issues. We see a trend in Colombia now. We have the first progressive or left politically oriented government in history of our country, which is finishing in 2026, and for sure it will come a different government, maybe from the total opposite side of the spectrum that we are having right now, like the one that is beginning here in January. And in that sense, what we have seen that is very powerful is we are not confronting those agendas, fighting back, that we are here, we are going to stay, and we are relevant, but mixing with intersectionality. When we open the umbrella and we talk that LGBTQI plus people is not only sexually diverse individuals, but we are also women, we are also migrants, we might have people with disabilities, but also different race and ethnicities, different range of ages of all of us, we become more powerful. Because under that umbrella of intersectionality that I personally believe is the future of the sexual diversity agenda in the following years, that open umbrella is so powerful. It collectivizes such amount of people that fight it against that. It will be practically fighting the entire society. And then we become not like completely bulletproof, but at least it will be harder to fight against us. And I do believe we shouldn't fight those corporate or even political efforts trying to go against that as by just declarations. We have been investing in LGBTQI plus movement, have been investing a lot of time and money fighting back by our speech and the strength of our activism, but actually the power of data and the power of best practices and the power of testimonials are the ones sometimes senior leadership in corporations are lacking of to see, to hear, to have evidence of that. So my invitation will be let's fight smarter, not harder.
Yes.
And let's understand how to speak in their own language. Senior leadership in corporations look for data, for profitability. They go to sleep thinking in profit and they woke up thinking in profit. And we are a great source of profit, not only by talent, but also as customers and also as suppliers. I do see a lot of value that we can add on the value chain, becoming stronger entrepreneurs, more competitive small business owners, and actually if I cannot get unemployment, I can become an entrepreneur and later a successful small business owners and plug in my business with those value chains of the different corporations like this one that is hosting us today, that is saying, we welcome you.
Yes.
And I believe that will be more powerful than only fighting back with all of our efforts of our speech, but actually speaking their own language. That's smarter and not necessarily working hard.
I like the idea to fight smarter, not harder. Okay, we're almost out of time, so unfortunately I have to cut this a bit shorter. Rosalba, I'm going to ask you to make some closing remarks, and then we'll hear from Dr. Badgett, and then we'll hand back the stage. Rosalba.
Sí, yo voy a hablar un poco sobre la última pregunta que tiene que ver con salud mental.
Yes, I'd like to speak a little bit about that last question regarding mental health.
Primeramente, nosotros desde Colestón hemos podido identificar en el trabajo que vamos haciendo en el día a día a través de visitas domiciliarias que hacemos a cada uno de los grupos y sus familias.
This is something that we've been working on in Colestón. We've been trying to identify need in this area, and we've been doing this through home visits with our families.
Que para que la cooperativa funcione de manera eficiente en base a lo que queremos lograr, el desarrollo económico y sostenible de los grupos LGBTIQ.
In order for our cooperative to function in an efficient way, to truly have economic development that's sustainable for our LGBTIQ plus community,
no podemos solamente enfocarnos en que la cooperativa le va a entregar préstamo a la comunidad LGBTIQ y que ya todo va a estar solucionado.
We can't just say, we're going to give out loans and then every problem is going to be solved.
Sino que hay que hacer un trabajo estructural, integral entre estas personas, y hemos estado co-creando un proyecto que se llama Más allá del día a día.
We realize that we have to do more structural work, more comprehensive work with these people, and we've actually created a new program, and it's called Beyond the Day to Day.
Este proyecto busca organizar y entender qué está viviendo cada familia y cada persona en su hogar dentro de la comunidad LGBTIQ.
This initiative, this organization is focused on really understanding what the experience is of every family, of every individual that we work with who is LGBTIQ.
¿Qué ha pasado en esa infancia LGBTIQ? ¿Qué
What
ha
happened-
pasado en esa adolescencia?
What happened in their LGBTIQ childhoods? What happened in their adolescence?
Y qué en su vida actual, de esas cosas que han pasado en su pasado, valga la redundancia, no le ha permitido, no le permite integrarse socialmente a la sociedad.
And how this might affect them in their current lives. Everything that they've experienced in the past, how might this prevent them from truly socially integrating into society?
Para eso se necesitan profesionales, psicólogos y hasta psiquiatras que puedan entender la realidad de manera individual y particular por cada persona LGBTIQ que forme parte de una familia.
And in order to do this, we've enlisted mental health professionals, psychologists, and even psychiatrists who can work to understand the specific and individual needs of each person in the families that we work with.
Y estaríamos como teniendo expedientes por cada persona de la comunidad LGBTIQ, específicamente con, ejemplo, iniciaríamos con la provincia de Barahona, que es una provincia sur de República Dominicana, y con el Gran Santo Domingo, específicamente el Distrito Nacional.
We've developed files for each of the people in the families that we work with, and we're working based on our different provinces. We have a province called Barahona in the south of the Dominican Republic, and then also Santo Domingo.
Se estarían realizando actividades también de manera colectiva, conversatorio, con grupos específicamente de cada una de esas coordinaciones que anteriormente le mencioné.
And we've also been developing programs where we promote conversation, where we promote collective participation in each of those 6 areas that I previously mentioned.
Entendiéndonos como un espacio dentro de la organización de confianza, de integración, de diálogo oportuno, de diálogo no punitivo, o sea, que podamos entendernos desde nuestras propias realidades, obviamente con el acompañamiento de personas especializadas y profesionales en el área.
And by doing that, we're looking to create spaces of trust, spaces that are that provide comprehensive care, spaces where we can have dialogue in a timely way and not a punitive dialogue. Spaces where we can understand everybody's different reality, and obviously we count on professional support for this as well.
Hemos entendido que no podemos darle una charla a personas de la comunidad LGBTIQ para que aprenda cómo ser emprendedor.
We've learned that we can't just give a talk to people from the LGBTIQ community about how to be an entrepreneur.
En todo este proceso de conocimiento que vamos teniendo individualmente por cada persona, nos vamos dando cuenta si de verdad tiene un espíritu emprendedor.
Without truly addressing things in a comprehensive way, we've realized throughout this whole process and all the knowledge that we've developed with the LGBTIQ members of our organization that they truly do have an entrepreneurial spirit.
Y si tiene ese espíritu emprendedor, entonces comenzamos ya a ponerle en otra fase del proceso de entrar a la cooperativa, de entender, de involucrarse, entrar como socio. Cada uno debe de hacer una aportación en la cooperativa, porque las cooperativas son sociedades autónomas.
And if they do have that entrepreneurial spirit, then we invite them to become part of the phase where they actually join a co-op, they become members, they become partners, and they also contribute. They have to contribute as a requirement.
Y si posee otras habilidades que no son habilidades de emprendimiento, podemos identificar en qué espacio, ya sea de colestón, como voluntario, como empleado, empleada, pueden integrarse, y si tenemos alianza con otras organizaciones del Estado Dominicano, identificar dónde pueden tener un empleo digno con el acompañamiento de colestón.
And if they don't necessarily have that entrepreneurial spirit, we look for other ways that they can develop and participate, maybe in different ways in Colistom, or maybe they can find employment through that organization or through our partner organizations, other agencies that we work with, where they can truly find decent employment.
Okay.
Entonces, ya para cerrar ahí, como que finalmente...
Just to close.
Que Copdiversa tenga una mirada desde la autonomía económica y que las personas puedan entenderse como entes de poder para tomar decisiones dentro del espacio de Copdiversa.
That through Co-op Diversa, we have a vision for economic autonomy where people have the power to make decisions within the co-op.
Apoya al desarrollo mental de las personas de la comunidad LGBT a entenderse como que sí pueden salir de ese abismo que algunas veces entienden que no pueden salir y que no pueden lograr procesos desde sus propias autonomías.
And also to work on the mental development of people in our LGBTIQ community, helping them to truly believe that they can climb out of the abyss and have true autonomy.
El trabajo desde la democracia coalicionada en los espacios de toma de decisiones que tienen que ver con dinero, realizar asambleas, realizar votaciones para elegir a personas o representantes dentro de la cooperativa, viene a reforzar mucho todo este deseo de mirar al futuro en donde yo pueda también verme en un espacio de poder como otras compañeras y otros compañeros. Muchas gracias.
And this whole process that we're undertaking, where we're promoting coalition building, where we're promoting democratic participation, where people can be involved in making decisions about finances. We have assemblies, we have votes where people can elect representatives, and all of these actions reinforce this idea, this desire, and this belief that I can actually have a place in the future. I can see myself in a position of power just like anyone else.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalba. That was great. Round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you. I know we're out of time, so I'm going to very quickly hand over to you, Dr. Lee, to close us off with your final closing remarks. And perhaps any answers that you want to make very quickly to the questions.
Let's see, I'll go through
Good
each
luck.
one. So we're well into injury time, so I'm just going to say one thing, which is about restrictive spaces. We see, I think, when these things happen, when laws get passed, we think the answer to that is to pour as much money as we can into political change in different environments. But I want to argue that we need to double down on the economic side as well. It's a lot harder to do in those environments, but it is possible. I know organizations in Uganda that do general economic development work who have risen to the challenge. They are doing things to provide housing, food, and jobs for people. So I think we need to figure out how to do that effectively and double down while the political side, kind of winds its way to whatever process it's going to go through to get back to our rights. So.
Thank you. That's brilliant. I will not attempt to add to that or to reiterate it. Please give my panelists a very warm hand clap. Thank you so much for these brilliant insights. We will be looking forward to following your work. I will be looking forward to reading more from you, Dr. Lee, who I first met on the page, and of course, seeing all your work. Thank you all so much for your questions and contributions, for your kind attention and your patience, and see you around. Have a good day. Back to you, Nila.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ophelia. Thank you to the panel. And we're going to move straight into our keynote address.